You did not consciously choose to think about this person. You were in the middle of a perfectly ordinary day, actively engaged, entirely unrelated to them. Then, without any warning, they materialized in your mind. Their face, their specific cadence of speech, a hyper-specific scene that you involuntarily relived for the 100th time, experiencing it with the exact emotional weight of the first. You did not invite them into your awareness, yet they arrived, completely bypassing your defenses. The strangeness of this phenomenon is not simply that it occurred. The true strangeness lies in the fact that you have already actively attempted to stop it. You have already sold yourself the narrative that you have moved on. You have successfully navigated entire days without a single thought of them. Yet, they continually return. This is not happening because you are inherently weak. It is not happening because you are pathologically trapped by a past that refuses to release you. They return because a critical element of this connection has not yet found its proper alignment within your own psychology. This is fundamentally not about romance. This is not a classic case of dysfunctional attachment masquerading as deep-seated trauma. This is the architecture of human psychology. There is a precise mechanism driving this that operates far below the surface of what most people can perceive when they are drowning in the experience. At the absolute core, you are carrying the weight of something that lacks a precise name, yet occupies a massive, undeniable space in your reality. The distance currently separating you from this person, whether it is constructed of absolute silence, half-spoken truths, an unfinished proximity, or an absence that aches far more than logic dictates, is not a random occurrence. It is not an accident of fate. It possesses a rigid structure. It operates on a specific logic. And when you finally decode this logic, the external situation may remain unchanged, but your internal reality will permanently shift. The intrusive thought that arrives unannounced is the most violently honest signal your psyche is capable of producing. It possesses absolutely zero respect for your willpower. It refuses to submit to your conscious, logical decision to move forward. It does not evaporate when you are distracted, when you are busy, or when you are actively drafting perfectly rational arguments, detailing why the connection makes no sense, why it would never work, or why it firmly belongs in the archives. It simply returns. The essential objective is not to violently suppress this thought. The true objective is to identify exactly what this thought is desperately attempting to reveal to you. Something you have blatantly refused to perceive. You understand the suffocating reality of carrying an undefinable burden. Have you ever experienced a moment of genuine, unpretentious well-being, only to be ambushed by a sudden, disproportionate surge of emotion? A specific scent, an old song, a phrase delivered with a familiar intonation. Instantly, you are violently pulled back into that agonizing purgatory, between words and silence, between actual history and potential futures, between the razor-sharp clarity of authentic emotion and the total collapse of perspective. What you are currently enduring is not a flaw in your character. It is not an emotional defect requiring immediate correction. It is not a symptom of immaturity or an inability to detach. It is the undeniable signature of a connection that has struck a deeply buried nerve within your architecture. connections that strike this specific nerve absolutely do not dissolve according to logical timelines. They stubbornly persist until the unseen is finally acknowledged, until the misunderstood is finally decoded. The situation does not necessarily require a neat resolution or the conclusion your ego desires, but it strictly demands understanding. The intensity of what you feel toward this specific individual is rarely exclusively about them. It is inextricably linked to exactly what they manage to awaken inside you. Awakening a latent, dormant element within your own psyche is one of the most destabilizing, terrifying processes a human being can endure. Because what is awakened is rarely comfortable. Often, what is dragged to the surface is the exact truth you have spent a lifetime meticulously ignoring. Carl Jung did not merely treat superficial symptoms. He dedicated his life to excavating the layers of the psyche that remain entirely inaccessible to conscious thought. The unconscious. Jung's concept of the unconscious was not merely a dusty basement for repressed memories and forbidden desires. He identified it as a living, breathing dimension of the psyche, operating with its own complex language, its own sovereign intelligence, and its own hidden agendas. This dimension functions parallel to your waking consciousness, silently dictating your thoughts, engineering your emotions, and steering your relationship choices in ways that remain entirely imperceptible to you. One of Jung's most critical concepts is psychic projection. In this framework, projection is neither a personal failure nor a pathology. It is an automatic, universal defense mechanism. Internal elements that have not yet been recognized, named, or integrated by your conscious mind are automatically projected outward and perceived as belonging to people or situations in your external environment. The psyche externalizes these elements because it lacks the capacity to recognize them as its own internal property. In concrete terms, a significant portion of what you feel for this person has absolutely nothing to do with their actual individual identity. It is directly tied to the aspects of your own psychology that they manage to activate. The specific qualities you admire in them, the profound physiological shifts you experience in their presence, that jarring sense of immediate recognition, as if you have known them from a timeline that predates your actual history. All of this carries the unmistakable signature of psychic projection. This reality does not invalidate your feelings, but it drastically alters the trajectory of your internal investigation. When you encounter someone who, either overtly or subtly, embodies the exact qualities projected by your own unintegrated inner architecture, the resulting impact is one of immediate, paralyzing recognition. This reaction is not logical. It predates logic entirely. It is as if an ancient fragment of your identity is finally recognizing something it has spent a lifetime waiting to see. This specific recognition carries an intensity that is wildly disproportionate to the actual time you spent together or the volume of shared experiences. When this specific bond fractures, when distance inevitably sets in, when the silence becomes absolute, the agonizing pain is not merely the physical absence of another human being. It is the brutal, sudden shattering of a mirror that finally showed you a critical facet of yourself you were previously blind to. Modern attachment theory perfectly intersects with Jung's clinical observations. The attachment styles forged in our earliest years become the invisible foundational operating system through which every single adult interaction is filtered and interpreted. This system dictates exactly what we feel when someone attempts closeness, how we interpret their silence, what we accept as genuine affection, and what we immediately flag as impending rejection. The vital convergence is this: these attachment patterns are not triggered with equal intensity by everyone we meet. They are activated with absolute maximum force only in connections that manage to penetrate the oldest, most deeply buried layers of our psyche. This is precisely why the intensity you feel for this one individual isolates them from everyone else in your reality. There is a specific frequency they emit that resonates directly with something inside you. Something that may have been waiting decades to be acknowledged, integrated, or healed. Clinical research consistently demonstrates that individuals operating with avoidant attachment styles routinely experience a deep, visceral discomfort with emotional proximity. They instinctively create distance to preserve a perceived, necessary autonomy. It is critical to understand that this distancing is rarely a calculated, malicious strategy, nor is it evidence of apathy. In most scenarios, it is the exact opposite. It is an involuntary defense mechanism that violently activates precisely because the emotional intensity breached a threshold their nervous system was entirely unequipped to process without triggering a severe state of alert. Here is the unvarnished truth regarding the distance currently suffocating your connection. It is highly probable they are not distant because they feel nothing. It is highly probable they are distant because they feel significantly more than they possess the internal architecture to manage. When affection is fleeting or superficial, the perceived risk is minimal and executing actions is effortless. But when the connection touches something undeniably real, when it activates the deepest strata of the psyche and forces dormant elements to wake, the instinctual response is immediate withdrawal. Not because the desire for closeness is absent, but because they completely lack the internal blueprint to achieve that closeness without entirely losing their own identity. Jung's concept of the shadow illuminates this dynamic with unsettling precision. The shadow is not simply a repository for negativity. It encompasses every single psychic element that has been actively excluded from conscious awareness. Everything an individual has been conditioned to view as unacceptable, dangerous, weak, shameful, or contradictory to their carefully curated public persona is violently shoved into the shadow. These elements do not vanish. The conscious mind simply refuses to look at them. The shadow hoards, the fears never spoken aloud, the core needs never validated, and the deep vulnerabilities hidden beneath thick armor of independence, self-deprecation, or manufactured confidence. Most importantly, it holds everything a person secretly wished to give and receive, but learned through brutal experience that desiring was entirely too dangerous. When you occupy close proximity with someone who triggers this level of intensity, their shadow inevitably begins to surface. For individuals operating with defensive attachment frameworks, this emergence registers as a massive existential threat. even when absolutely no real danger is present. They register a profound, undefinable unease in your presence. Following a moment of genuine, terrifying vulnerability, an internal alarm triggers a mandatory withdrawal sequence. This withdrawal is rarely a rejection of you. It is the sheer magnitude of their own internal reaction that forces the retreat. The massive stakes involved paralyze their ability to move toward the exact thing they desire. Jung observed that confronting the shadow, the grueling process of recognizing and integrating unconscious material, is the most vital, foundational task of human psychological development. It is also the exact task the vast majority of people abandon halfway through. They abandon it not because it is physically impossible, but because it demands a terrifying level of internal honesty that society never teaches. The agonizing distance you feel and the distance they rigidly maintain is a direct reflection of the massive gap between the genuine affection that exists and the total lack of internal resources required to close that gap without experiencing total psychological collapse. You know this exact paralysis from the inside. You know the exact moment when the affection is undeniable, when the intention is crystalline, yet an invisible barrier prevents execution. It is not a lack of common courage. It is the terrifying realization that this specific approach is too significant to risk. You fear that an error here will cost you something you are entirely unsure you could ever repair. Have you ever drafted a message, agonizing over every single syllable, endlessly deconstructing the potential impact? You hesitated not out of ignorance, but because you knew entirely too much. You knew hitting send would initiate a sequence that would demand an emotional capacity you were unsure you possessed. So you deleted the text, left with the hollow, sickening realization that you made the safest yet most devastatingly costly choice available. You understand the exhaustion of occupying two realities simultaneously. The external reality where you navigate work, obligations, and manufactured laughter, and the internal, invisible reality where you are permanently trapped in the conversation that never occurred, the encounter that remains unfinished, the agonizing space between what was deeply felt and what was left entirely unsaid. The cumulative exhaustion generated by maintaining these dual timelines is undeniable. You can distinguish the exact texture of their silence. With a precision forged through sheer pain, you can easily differentiate between a temporary, chaotic distraction and a deliberate, methodical withdrawal. You have spent countless nights operating as a forensic investigator of your own past, analyzing their specific wording, their subtle intonations, desperately trying to pinpoint the exact microsecond the dynamic shifted. You execute this analysis not as a form of self-punishment, but because your intellect is desperately searching for the logical pattern that explains what your heart refuses to accept, and the most sincere, buried fragment of your identity already knows the truth. This is not exclusively about them. This entire narrative is a mirror, revealing a facet of your own architecture you are desperately avoiding. The sudden, violent resurgence of their memory is not a regression. It is your psyche screaming that a critical element remains unintegrated. You carry this invisible, heavy burden through every ordinary interaction, present enough to function, but internally exiled to a space no one else can access. This internal division generates massive, measurable tension. Every single time your focus involuntarily snaps back to this unresolved dynamic, you effectively vacate the present moment, and the present is the exclusive arena where your actual life occurs. Important decisions, new connections, and genuine growth strictly require your present attention. When a massive percentage of your cognitive capacity is permanently allocated to a ghost, your present reality is insidiously, systematically impoverished. There is a massive, hidden cost to this holding pattern. The future you fail to construct while you remain anchored to the past. The new dynamics you refuse to deepen because your emotional bandwidth is already occupied. The necessary risks you avoid because you lack the reserves to manage failure. Psychological research consistently confirms that hoarding unintegrated emotional experiences directly degrades your capacity for emotional regulation and drastically increases chronic rumination. Carrying this unintegrated burden is quietly exhausting your reserves. Resources that should be deployed for innovation, connection, and progress are entirely consumed by the effort required to simply maintain the weight of the unresolved. The turning point is not a sudden, magical solution. It is a shift in perspective. Jung asserted that raw awareness is the catalyst for genuine change, not because intellectual understanding immediately neutralizes the pain, but because observing a pattern with brutal, unfiltered honesty strips that pattern of its automatic authority. It will not vanish instantly, but it will cease operating in the dark. And it is in the dark where the highest emotional toll is extracted. The vital question is not whether they will return. The vital question is, what exactly does this agonizing connection demand you recognize within yourself? What dormant element has it violently awakened? What fragment of your identity was asleep before they arrived and can now never return to its previous state? What has been awakened absolutely does not require their physical presence to be resolved. It strictly requires your internal acknowledgement. That acknowledgement is the grueling, necessary work currently demanding your attention, entirely independent of their actions or external circumstances. You are not a hostage to your history. You are actively in the process of an intense, necessary evolution. If you have recognized that it is time to cease waiting for an external variable to shift and instead initiate concrete internal action, then the real work begins now. When you think of this person who continuously breaches your mental perimeter, what is the exact texture of the emotion? Is it raw nostalgia, profound sadness, a suffocating emptiness, or a frequency you still lack the vocabulary to name? Identify it, not to find a quick fix, but because the simple act of naming the burden is a vital exercise in internal honesty, an act your psyche takes incredibly seriously. If this analysis articulated a reality you have been silently carrying, type "I claim my reality" in the comments. Anchor that recognition. Then, share this with the one person in your life you know is quietly drowning in an unresolved dynamic, desperately needing to understand the architecture of their own pain.